Welcome back to the After Dinner Leadership podcast. Back in December 2022, do you remember that? Well, I do. It was a really significant time for this podcast because we transformed the format based on a conversation with one of our guests, Oscar Trimboli. We talked about how to listen then, and he's come back to help me to think about that topic in a lot more detail. I'm really grateful for his input. This is a deeply profound conversation for me, really examining the art and craft of listening, and particularly thinking about how AI could enhance or hinder the power of our listening when we're meeting together with other leaders. Take a listen, enjoy, share it with others as you see fit, and I trust it will help you to be a better listener. And it's a very warm welcome back to the After Dinner Leadership table to Oscar Trimboli. Welcome, Oscar.
G'day, Simon, and I am looking forward to continuing the conversation.
Yeah, so it's back at the end of 2022. So episodes 42 and 43, we'll talk about that in a moment. Oscar came as a guest and we spoke about how to listen and his excellent book, which I have here by my side again, and really good work. And a special thank you actually in person to Oscar, because it was that conversation that helped us to change gears in the format of how we currently run the podcast. And it was a really interesting experience because I asked the question which I'd heard Oscar ask, is what have you noticed about my listening? And then he told me what he noticed, and it wasn't all critical, I would say, but it was honest and it was truthful and it was very helpful. And I've used that example many times, Oscar, since. I haven't told you this. When I'm talking about feedback and that question, what have you noticed, being a really powerful one, that be prepared for what you receive, because it may not always be what you're expecting. Now, you may not have a strong recollection of that. That was, nearly 3 years ago. It was a transformational conversation for the context of the podcast. So thank you for that.
And to you too, because you created the environment that made it safe enough for me to show you what I noticed. It's like there are other people who do ask me that question and don't care what I'm about to say or going to do anything with it. I sense something very different from you. So we always talk about the difference between hearing and listening is the action you take. So, as no doubt, you probably notice the conversations are a little different since then.
Yeah, definitely. The real measure of that will be asking a listener whether they've felt that there was a difference. But I've certainly enjoyed it. I mean, one of the reasons I'm doing this is for the learning and expanding my understanding. And I've felt the conversations to be richer for me, and I know people have enjoyed that beyond. So special thank you to that, and I appreciate it very much. That question, what have you noticed, I've found to be very useful. And maybe there's something in that. Is there any other leading questions? Lead -in, like questions that help to provoke, to encourage that kind of two-way dialogue that you find useful?
Now, I think a lot of us don't realize that questions have direction. Questions create distance, and they also create impact. And the kinds of questions you ask, a lot of us aren't conscious of the kinds of questions we ask. We're typically asking questions that are very much about what, how do I learn more about the what that they're talking about? And shorter questions, less than 8 words, are going to have higher impact. So if you're looking for the impactful questions, and typically they're either process questions, and I'll give you an example of those, and then the other ones are there to provoke thinking and meaning. So there's two kinds of thinking. There's reflection and reflective. And in your reflexive noticing, you're thinking or you're noticing how you thought about your response, not necessarily the response you provided. So it might be I'm always talking about problems rather than solutions, or I'm always talking about the future and never in the past, or something like that. So
Yes.
the process questions, all at the beginning of any conversation, like what would make this a good X? What would make this a good meeting? What would be a good outcome? What will make this a good conversation? That's pretty much table stakes for any leader facilitating any kind of dialogue, whether that's one-to-one or group setting or face-to-face or video conference. But the bit they miss is the check-in at every 25% of that meeting to go, just checking in at the beginning of the meeting, we said X, how are we tracking? So that how we tracking question allows participants, and by the way, it gives the host some time themselves while everyone's collecting their thoughts, to do a bit of a retrospective about where we've been and a prospective about where are we going. Checking in regularly gives you areas of improvement as a system and the dialogue rather than just the individual people in the system itself. So in a 1 hour meeting, you should ask a version of that question about every 15 minutes. When you're getting to the back end of a meeting, one of the things we should always explore is, given the time available, where would we like to finish? Which gives everybody time to either say, hey, we've spent way too much time talking about this, or we need to double click down on this. And it has to be timed so it gives the group or the dialogue time to adjust. So it's not, hey, we've got 5 minutes to go in a 1 hour meeting. What do we got to cover off? You know, it's at the 30-minute mark, it's at the 35-minute mark, it's at the 40-minute mark. If the group's a high-performing group and they meet regularly, the final question I would invite any leader, either in a one-on-one dialogue or in a group dialogue, is again in that last 25% of the meeting. If we did this meeting all over again, what's one thing we would change? Not the content, not the agenda, but what's one thing we would change about the way we do this? And if you struggle to get feedback, Simon, or your leaders that you work with struggle to get feedback, that was a very coded give me feedback question without saying give me feedback. So they're the ones. So try and orientate your questions at the thinking level, not the content level, to increase their impact and their reflexivity rather than just a reflection.
Well, that's helpful in itself, perhaps for this conversation, but we could press a little reset button in this context. And for you, Oscar, what would make this a good conversation? Maybe let's start there. I've rushed in as I do. So let's reset. What would make this a good conversation?
Okay, I'm glad you asked that question twice so that you can listen for the difference. First time Simon asked that question is, what will make this a good conversation for you? We're actually not interested in the participant's perspective. We're actually interested in what will make this a good conversation. So if it's two people, there's a third entity in every dialogue, and that's the conversation that's taking place. So there's you and there's me, and then there's the dialogue. The question needs to be orientated at the dialogue, not at the participant. So don't ask the first question Simon asked, because it will provide a very selfish perspective. It will provide a very narrow perspective. Rather, ask the second question, what will make this a good conversation? Not what will make this a good conversation for you. So what will make this a good conversation is that it would be organic and in service of the people who are listening, Simon. And for you, what will make it a good conversation?
Yeah, I think there's similarities there. One of the things I'm very mindful of, which I think I ran the risk of last time, was overthinking the listening and kind of tripping over myself in some way, trying to impress you or impress the audience that I'm listening well. And I'm mindful of it again today. And so what would make a good conversation is that we converse and we're sensitive to each other's flows and energies.
We'll get into the maths of listening maybe a little bit later on.
Yeah.
But one of the things you want to do as a leader, and you yourself, Simon, in this conversation, is notice turn taking. So the higher the turn taking, the more the conversation's going to flow. So the number of turns taken by each of the speaker rather than an extended monologue with a long pause and all of that. And equally, there's a curiosity index in are we making statements to expand or are we asking questions? There's a whole dynamic there as well. So, yeah give yourself a break, mate. Don't worry about listening. Just let's chat.
Okay. Well, I'd love to have some of your. I mean, we spoke a couple of years ago, so I'd love to hear what you've been learning about listening, and just exploring that would be really interesting for me.
Yeah, the big difference is coding listening, and using 4 different AI tools. I've taught myself how to code. Ironically, I've worked for technology companies for 30 years and interacted with software engineering divisions on a daily basis, but never wrote a line of code in my life. Have a completely different respect for their profession now. And what I've been doing is ingesting transcripts from team meetings and anonymizing them first, both the participants and any sensitive numeric values or any sensitive project names or the like, and then using software to code how listening is taking place in one specific meeting, but also longitudinally over time as well. So a simple example of the measures we look at is what percentage of participants make up 80% share of voice.
Yeah.
So in some meetings, it could be as low as 20%. That means that very few people are dominating the meeting, or very few people are in the meeting as experts for that period of time, and it's completely appropriate. So the raw numeric isn't the issue. The consciousness of how many participants should be taking part in the conversation.
So would you have a timestamp in?
Yeah, they're all transcripts, and all the transcripts are timestamped. So they're.
Okay.
If you can just visualize going from left to right, we've got a participant identification, a start time, and a finish time, which gives us the talk time. Then we have various other data elements, such as percentage of time that 80% of people spoke in the first, second, third, and final quarter of the meeting. So we measure the total meeting as well as each individual quarter of the meeting as well. Yes. We also track turn taking, how frequently the turns happen, and we express that as a percentage of time rather than just a straight numeric, because longer meetings are obviously going to have more turn taking. So that's turn taking expressed as a decimal per minute. But we also have a number of questions asked. And my favourite, number of clarifying questions asked, which, Simon, I have to tell you, are incredibly rare and yet incredibly potent.
Yes.
So to check with the speaker that your understanding of their question is what they think they asked, as well as what you think you're about to answer. We also finally have a numeric value from 1 to 6 to represent the impact of that question and the likelihood that that question would be understood. So question complexity is the heuristic we use there. So again, it's very insightful to me looking at all these transcripts, how complex questions actually are and how low the likelihood is that they can both be understood and answered in an effective way. So as you can imagine, people have completely different meetings. Some meetings are with the same people. Some teams have people absent and have external people come in, and those ratios will all change over time. Yet the thing that struck me is once we show the clients the data, all of a sudden things you've been saying to them about, I know you're telling me you're asking good questions, but do you realize this is a compound question, meaning it's a multiple question? When they see the data in front of them, the change or the awareness that change is required is much higher than just a dialogue with a third party who's either reading a transcript or listening to a recording. So I'm curious what all that got you pondering on now.
Well, what it ponders on, many years ago when I first came into the industry, the company that I was working with were using a tool they called behavior analysis. I think verbal behavior analysis, and it was based on a lot of the research of Neil Rackham and the different categorizations.
And for those who don't know Neil, you might want to explain.
Yeah, actually, I can't remember all of his background, but he's one of the fathers of the spin selling concept.
That's what he's most famous for.
And basically, we've broken down into these 14 different behavioral categories, and it was less it was codified, but it was more pen and paper than through software. But we would watch a dialogue, and we would then annotate when anybody did one of those behaviors, and then feed that back to them. And it was also in a similar way, it was a very powerful realization that when they saw the data, oh, hold on a minute, I didn't realize I was using these behaviors to this proportion and the clarifying behavior. So that's what's triggered in my mind is this memory of this, using this tool and seeing people come, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I was interrupting or talking over so frequently, or I didn't ask any questions at all. I disagree more than I support. And all of those behaviors can be used effectively, but it was the getting in the right proportions, what we called the skilled communicator, seemed to kind of resonate with people. And I love where you're going with that. And I think I'm confident it's a very helpful mirror for people, for teams to hold up and see themselves in and make some decisions off the back.
Yeah, and for a lot of my clients, just getting them to use the heads-up display online, if they're in Zoom or Teams or Google Meets, they all have either add-ins or add-in modules that maybe their organization has or hasn't licensed that gives them real time while they're in the meeting, a talk to listen ratio. And again, I always say to them, 50-50 isn't the target. Your awareness is the target. It's like, because the fact that they have a measurement instrument in front of them tells them straight away, right, I need to be aware of this. And the skill is the flexibility to be situationally aware. In a one-on-one, 50-50 may not be appropriate. It might be 80-20 if you're the manager. In a group setting, it may be that you're only talking again 20%. But if you're doing a big setup as a leader in a group meeting, that number should be closer to 30% speaking versus listening than it should be to 20 or even 10% if you're doing a regular kind of meeting there. So I think the skill is how situationally are you aware of what the right kind of mix would be to help everyone out.
Yeah. What have you found that has surprised you?
So I'm going to use the clarifying question because I love the way you just took the question and shortened it. Surprised me about what? Because we kind of covered a lot there.
Yeah. In doing this coding, I anticipate there was some expectations in terms of where you're going to go, where you've decided to put these different turns and that. Having gone through the process of analysing some of those meetings or going through the coding process itself, is there anything in that has, oh, wow, that wasn't what I expected, or anything along
probably 3 levels of surprise. One, my ability to have an AI partner learning with me. And the reason I said earlier on I had to use 4 different tools, because they don't all do the same task to the same level of proficiency. Right. Some do the question analysis much better than the other one, but then some of the other ones don't necessarily do the analysis calculation consistently. Like, you can literally give it the same transcript and it'll come with different calculations each time. And I know it's the way I set it up. So the first learning was, wow, 4 different models. Some do it better than others. And within that, there's subsets of that. One, you can teach an old dog new tricks. It's like, I'm not saying I wrote the software, but I instructed a tool that wrote the software that, I can easily see. And we're kind of just trying to stress test it now to get completely different industry context and linguistic models, not different languages, but just different syntax into the system. So, for example, how do you define a clarifying question is very different in the medical profession from how you do it in financial services. So there's that. Yes. Second one for me was the speed at which you could do that. It's like, my biggest constraint was running out of tokens on my paid plan for the kinds of transcripts I was throwing at this thing. So I'd have to wait 24 hours before we go on to the next thing. They're getting better in both the way they share tokens to time as well as how they do the calculations and computations. The second one was about my community. I just said, hey, if you've got some transcripts that I could help anonymize with you, I need to be very divergent in the industry set I look at, because my industry subsets are just the work of my clients. So that's relatively narrow. So very generous communities sharing how many different transcript formats they are out there. You would think it's standardized. It's not. So, one of the first sets of questions we have to ask is, what transcript is this? A Zoom transcript? Is this an auto transcript? It's like, which inputs were we taking it from? And I think ultimately the surprising thing for me is that for very data, linear, structured thinkers, this is just a brilliant tool where they go, I get it. Yeah. Okay, just tell me what I've got to do, instead of arguing about, who cares about question length, who cares about question distance, or who cares about question direction. When we show them 4 questions, 2 questions in the same direction, 2 in a different direction, they go, oh, okay, yeah, right. And you can see that, excitingly for me, it's like, oh, can I put this meeting in and can I put that meeting in? And there's a whole ethics of recording, storing, sharing this information. So I'm curious how you've seen your clients embrace, engage with these types of technologies as well.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I like those surprises. I just actually in the last 2 weeks, I was facilitating a senior leadership meeting from some global heads that had come to London. And I was with them for one day of 3, but they shared with me the output from the other days. And the leader of the group had asked that no one brings their laptops into the room, like actively, sort of on the tables, he doesn't like the click clacking. He wants people to get involved into rich dialogue together. And one of the guys who was a bit more tech orientated, so that's kind of how I make notes. That's how I listen in those meetings is by using that. But I want to respect that request. Is it okay if I put my phone on the desk and record so we can capture using an AI tool the main threads of the conversation and then put it together? And before we publish it officially, I'll just give you an opportunity to edit. So I was there for a day. He did that in every section. And then the subsequent 2 days, he did the same. And then every leader of the different components was able to say, this is wrong, or can we take that out? These type of things. So that's the first time I've seen it in such a extensive use over time outside of an online meeting. So I've used it in Zoom, and actually I've found the Zoom summary to be very accurate in terms of content. And picking up actions. And you've got the value of the individual people dialing in that you can use on Zoom. So it knows it's called the roles, the characters can be more easily identified. It's actually pretty impressive how it was picking up the different content and picking up names and these type of things. So that's where I've seen it most recently. And it seemed to be pretty effective as a way of allowing them to speak without being overly concerned, is this being captured? And the quality of it was reasonably high from what I can tell.
Yeah. Can you zoom me back into the room?
Yeah.
Because I was curious about explicit permission. My sense is that the person doing the recording or request was directing their question to the host of the meeting, not to everyone present.
Yeah, probably to everyone present was inferred, I think, rather than directly.
Yeah. So it wasn't explicit.
Requested. Yes.
Yeah. So I think this is a role a host increasingly has to do, because if the analogy to this is I have clients who say, I have a client who logs into our meeting with their AI agent. What's the ethics of that?
Yeah.
Because you don't know where it's being recorded. You don't know where it's being stored. You don't know how it's being shared. You don't know how it's being secured. So I think that one of the host roles in that moment where that person asks that is to have a very deliberate and explicit conversation with everyone that they're comfortable with it, because I'm going to ask you a follow-up question shortly. If the host asks that question in that moment, what responses do you think would have been around the room? I'm assuming it's it's not a big meeting. It's probably hands full of people.
Yeah, the word
present.
10 participants in the meeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And the reason is, like, the host's job isn't to ask that question because of, GDPR and storage and privacy regulations. No, it's much deeper than that. By asking and making it explicit, it also sends a signal that there's a contract that we're not going to hold back.
Yes.
I suspect that despite the fact people may have forgotten it was there at some points during the meeting, there were times that they remembered it was there at some points during the meeting, and the depth, breadth, or transparency or authenticity of the response may be at a very, very different level. So I'm just curious, when you say, it didn't impact the dialogue, with that perspective, do you think it's possible it may have?
Of course, yeah, it is. I'm reflecting on that point, I guess, from my participation in that we did some contracting as a group that would have been independent of whether the AI was being used or not. And in fact, before the AI was used, we had done that piece of setting up the session. So I think that will have contributed massively to the open dialogue. And it had started, they already, you could tell this team already fairly newly formed in the last 6 months. The leader had done a great job at engaging with them at a level where there was a high level of trust already in the room. So in that particular context, but I can't dismiss the question or the point of your question, which is that could have impacted the quality of their contribution. It's hard to gauge. What I can say is there was a lot of very open dialogue, self-critical as well as challenging, from my observation of it. But and the feedback that they had of each other is that they were, when we checked in on the ways of working, that they were, appropriately challenging and respecting each other. Yeah.
And I suspect if we overlaid forming, storming, norming, performing, although it was a newly formed team in 6 months, it seemed like the leader had got them beyond the forming stage.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And probably had some storming and a little bit of norming. And again, my invitation for you listening is just be situationally aware of, sometimes that's going to be completely appropriate. Sometimes it's not. And you as the leader in the room have to make the judgment call to go, okay. Yeah, and it's a great example of use the technology. Don't let the technology use you. And as long as the tool was trusted by the group. As a build, Simon, what's the one thing you would want people listening to know about the impact of that tool, maybe when to use it or when not to use it, now that you've had the context of it both online and offline?
The thing that I liked about it was the shutting down the laptops or iPads or whatever somebody uses. So because I do find that can get in the way of good dialogue. So that, again, it's a bit of a balance and trade-off scenario in that when people come in and they're tapping away, they've also got their laptops open to all the other notifications that are coming in, and that they interrupt the meeting, and the quality of the discussion, I feel, is impaired sometimes in those situations because they're distracted by another email, and you're never quite sure whether the person's making notes or responding to the dozen emails that have come in the last 10 minutes. So that's one of my reflections, is that request by the leader to have that element switched off. It felt like and I think everybody seemed to respect the trade-off, which was, okay, let's use technology to capture some elements of this. Let's test it. It was positioned as a trial. Actually, I don't think I said that. It was like, look, can we just try this out? This is the first time we're coming together in person. Can we try this out and see if it works? And he positioned it as such. And so I think there's merits in it, but I love this idea of explicitly contracting that. And the last thought is doing that in the moment. Because of social pressures, it would be quite unlikely, if the leader is the one that's suggesting it, that people are saying, no, I disagree. So it's just almost in
correct.
the moment.
But that's why I think forcing the explicit conversation is then going to surface something more significant for the group.
Yes.
Because it's not about the recording at that point, is it, Simon? If someone says, I don't feel comfortable about being recorded in this meeting on this topic, well, that's just a signpost to a bigger issue. It's not, the recording isn't the issue. The recording's just a symptom of something wider. But the other point, and we talking about this with a couple of our clients, is like whether it's the AI tool connected to a participant that's external, whether that's a supplier or a customer, or it's an AI agent recording on behalf of a staff member, the best time to signal the protocol is before the meeting in the invitation. So, no AI agents for recording in this meeting, or AI agents are welcome in this meeting. But then it doesn't relieve anybody of, you still have to do the explicit at the beginning of the meeting. Is everyone okay? This meeting is actually being recorded by an AI agent or agents. Are you okay with that? And you need, as the host, as the leader in the room, as the person creating the container for powerful, impactful, transformational communication, it is the foundation to the rest of the dialogue.
Yeah, that's triggered another quick thought then, is that, I was there as the facilitator, not the leader host. But I feel like in the future, if that happens again, that I've got a responsibility to do that explicit contracting to honor my role in the group. There's something that sits on my shoulders, not just with the client's shoulders, I feel, that would be important to...
Or a pre-brief with the client, or a checklist thing and all of that. So given our time remaining, where would you like to go?
Okay. I would love to spend a few minutes talking about resetting the listening battery. It's a different topic. Are you okay to move off the AI topic, Oscar?
Before I do, and I'm comfortable moving off it, is how did that question help you, given the time remaining? Because I noticed your body shape changed out of the dialogue we were just in when I asked that question.
It was helpful because I would like to go there, and I was in a similar place where I was going to ask a version of that question, or how are we checking, how are we tracking, or whatever. I'm really pleased to be able to shift gears to another. Yeah,
and it gives the participants in a group meeting the opportunity to reflect back, as well as to go, okay, we're now going to move forward. Yeah. Because the question you asked me, am I okay to proceed, is a very important question to ask.
Right.
I am, but some others might go, hey, just before we go, I think we've got to tie this off, or we haven't buttoned this down, or whatever analogy or metaphor you want to use. But that creates the circuit breaker in the dialogue to go, okay, let's surface whatever we need to do quickly, and we can use time as a constraint for the dialogue to become more effective.
Brilliant.
So now we can move on to listening batteries.
Thank you.
And listening batteries are more than listening batteries. They're your energy battery, right? It's got nothing to do with your listening. It's got to do with your speaking. It's got to do with your breath. It's got to do with your energy level. It's got to do with the blood sugars in your body. It's got to do with how well hydrated you are. It's got to do with when was the last time your body moved. And by that, I don't mean, drink something. I mean physically move for an extended period of time. And when was the last time your eyes hit the sunlight, as opposed to being in an office or a home office and not. So when we think about the listening battery metaphor was in the context of listening, but as corporate athletes, we have to think about our state management, our energy management, and you can always do an audit when you're getting frustrated with a conversation, when you misspoke, when your word choice wasn't as effective. I'm fairly certain your energy battery was yellow-red rather than green-orange.
Yes. Yeah.
So first thing is be conscious of it. That's the very first thing we need to do. And being conscious of it means we're deliberate in how we're managing our calendars, our schedules, and creating gaps. So we're having 50-minute meetings, not 1-hour meetings, creating gaps in the day so you can do your level 2 thinking rather than your reactive responsive thinking at level 1. So having the gaps, and the gaps are there not just for you, but also for the other people you're working with. So they've got time to get their state ready for the meeting, or maybe you need to reschedule the meeting, Simon won't tell you this, but he's got a chest infection, and the first thing I asked him is if he wanted to reschedule, right? This should be something we're comfortable contracting. And he was fine. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to ask him anything about that. So just do that quick audit. When was the last time I had a glass of water? When was the last time I saw sunlight? When did my body move? Am I better in the mornings or the afternoons? Am I conscious of my food choice? Carbohydrates, like lots of pastas versus salads versus proteins, will do something completely different to your state in the afternoon period compared to the morning period. Event managers, where I go and speak at events in the morning, I don't take any food because my performance state is very different when I am rabbit ears hungry versus rabbit ears full. So you have to be conscious of it first, Simon. I think that's the very first thing. Through that audit list of things I just ran through with what's going on for you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, in terms of actually things I need to do better off that list, drinking more water is one. So in terms of that personal audit, there's that. There's also just this idea of linking listening to more general energy is, I think, really powerful, actually. Like not seeing it as a distinct, different thing. I've been far more conscious of my energy probably in the last 10 years, I would say, than like 30 years ago. It felt like it was limitless. And the older I get, the more conscious that time and energy are things to be working on or being mindful of in terms of being productive. And that reset and recharge is such an important part throughout the day. And I find it, along with leaders I coach, so easy to get into back to back to back. And I can sense the kind of effectiveness is dropping throughout those. And you kind of mask it, put on the facade and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
I mean, so here's something for you, Oscar. That knowing doing gap. What do you use as a barometer to help you to kind of catch yourself? That's not a very good question. Yeah, maybe it is. What do you use as a barometer to help you realize there's a need to stop, pause, recharge?
I go telescope and microscope. So the telescope for me is I'm best between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. I know that's when I'm at my best. So I'm lucky because I get to work virtually and internationally. So West Coast, East Coast, USA time, no problem. Pacific time, all the way through to Singapore, no problem, right? Yeah. So macro is my client work for those scheduled in that energy period. Now, what happens, if you think about that, batteries moving towards red and black by about 1 p.m., I'm lucky enough where I can schedule time out, go for a walk and see the sunlight. And then I can pick it up in the afternoon, but my afternoon shift, like working now with London time, is very much shorter. I can give 3 hours in the PM, but I couldn't go from 1 p.m. all the way through to 6 p.m. without a stop.
Yeah.
And I've just had to learn that the hard way because it feels like jet lag because you're literally traveling time zones and your cortisol and your serotonin is very different in your body. Being conscious of what I eat and, the portions of what I eat the days before I've got those early starts or late night episodes in the European time zone. It doesn't matter if you're just working a 9 to 5 or an 8 to 8 role as an executive, because that's pretty much the hours you're going to work anyway, you just have to know and have an amazing EA or protect your calendar brutally, because no one's ever going to say to you, thanks for doing all those extra meetings. But they are going to remember the days you turned up frustrated and anxious and angry and hungry and hadn't seen sunlight for the whole day.
Yeah.
That's will detract from your long-term performance. And in executive roles, you're in a marathon. You're definitely not in a sprint. And there's a lot of executives that get adrenaline burnout and don't realize it because they never diagnose it, or their GPs don't diagnose it for them. You really have to be cautious. And the simplest system I've put in place is the 50-minute meeting. That's the one rule I won't break.
Yeah, great.
That's when I'm hosting the meeting. It's always 50 minutes.
Yeah. Well, in the spirit of that, we are coming close to that time, and I want to give back some of your evening as well, which you've been generous to offer to us. Now, you asked a good check-in question at the start, and you suggested there was an opportunity to do a reflective question at the end.
What's changed in your thinking, Simon?
One of the helpful things I didn't anticipate today was around the use of AI in a meeting and the ethical aspects of that. I hadn't properly clocked before. That was really useful for me. So thank you. And there's a deeper thing. We've had 3 conversations now, I think, Oscar, because we had a one a few years ago. But the way in which you share these little enhancements throughout the conversation and observations to be really useful. And I'll take those away. And I'll listen to this conversation again so I can write down and remember. That's partly how my mind works, to include that in future dialogue as well. So I'm grateful that you take these, almost break the fourth wall in some instances, and kind of narrate what's just happened. And that is helpful for me. And the quality of the question. For example, what would make a good conversation was another good learning from today's conversation for me. How about you?
Yeah, just for everyone to notice that my final question was directed at Simon's level of thinking. I didn't ask him about content, and notice how long it took him to reflect back on his response, which was multi-part. So I'm grateful for that. And the way you honour and respect my questions. And I appreciate that. And I think we created something more useful than the last 2 times we spoke, because our relationship has been built on trust, and we're both very comfortable to stretch the boundary of the conversation in ways we possibly wouldn't have before, because the trust is there. So thanks for being open to that.
It's a pleasure, Oscar. Thank you. It's lovely how it's a good learning experience for me, a good learning space, and thank you for what you bring to help that to happen. So appreciate it very much. Thanks
for listening.
I think there was something about being organic, and for you today, did it achieve that?
Yeah, and for those of you listening, the signal Simon just sent is that he heard what I said originally, and by playing it back, I now feel seen, heard, and valued. And I know the conversation's been incredibly dynamic and organic because of the number of turns we took and who led and who followed, because there wasn't, I didn't feel like one or the other of us was leading and following. But the initial 2 interviews, I think that it was much different spacing, length of monologue. I think there was much more turn taking, much more organic and dynamic conversation. And your client example helped to reinforce that I'm on the right track to build the ethical model I have in the AI calculations that I'm doing on the transcript, so I'm doing some on the right track there. So thanks for creating a different perspective on that in the face-to-face environment too.
Great. Thank you, Oscar. It's been lovely speaking with you again, and wish you all the very best of success in your listening.
Get well with that chest, mate.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again. Thank you for joining us at the After Dinner Leadership table, and trust that you've got good value from listening to this episode. Thanks for being here. One question for you. The question is, so what? What will you do with what you've just heard? And here's a few suggestions. Number 1, lead with more purpose. 2, mentor with patience. 3, share with pride. You think of anyone who you know that would benefit from listening to what you've just heard, that would help them to be a better leader today or in the future. Please share, like, subscribe. It helps other people to consume the content. And we wish you all the very best of success. And please listen again to another After Dinner Leadership conversation.